Hi, I'm Steve Hayes. I teach in the Department of Classics and World Religions at Ohio University. Last week, Jesse Hathaway wrote a column in the OU Post condemning two members of the OU community, including Professor Hutchinson of the College of Education, for subscribing to an online letter of support for Bill Ayers. Jesse expressed regret that neither of those people would agree to an interview. To tell the truth, what he anticipated didn't seem like much of an interview to me. He had a killer argument to prove how wrong his interviewees were. Strangely, he showed no interest in hearing what they actually signed or why. In fact, he wasn't at all curious about their thinking because, as he asserted, the simple truth is there is no good reason whatsoever to support Bill Ayers, period, end of story. Well, I like to see youthful enthusiasm as much as the next guy, but I'm a teacher, and so I think I have a responsibility to confront exuberant undergraduate ignorance, particularly when the undergraduate in question is using his ignorance to attack my colleagues. So even though I have never met Bill Ayers, and frankly I have no interest in the man, I did a strange and professorial thing. I actually read the online endorsement that Jesse had pilloried my colleagues for signing. When I discovered that it actually said something very modest and decent, I signed it. And then I dropped a quick note to the Post, which says simply this: many thanks to Jesse Hathaway for informing me about www.supportbillayers.org. I have just proudly added my endorsement to the list. I hoped that note might cause Jesse to continue to think about the matter. I hoped he might wonder, how come this professor, even after reading the indisputable brilliance of my column, decided that there was some reason to support Bill Ayers? Why wasn't he persuaded to accept my double dog guarantee that there is no good reason, period, end of story? I put in the little bit about being proud of signing the endorsement so that Jesse might think, hey, this guy doesn't sound too timid to give me an interview. I think I'll ask him. I tried to make it obvious that I would grant one. But apparently my efforts to encourage Jesse to further thought failed. He didn't revisit the question in his column a week later, and he hasn't contacted me. So I decided to make this little video for Jesse. Perhaps he will be willing to watch it. Perhaps it will also answer some of the concerns that some readers have expressed in the thread in the online version of the post. One thing I would have talked to Jesse about if he had interviewed me is what I call verbal sabotage, using explosive distortions to destroy areas of civic discourse. I would have told him that I think it is unjust for him or anyone else to engage in verbal sabotage just to make points against one's enemies. For example, Jesse represented the Support Ayers website as claiming that, and here I quote, investigations of Ayers' past as a murderous radical threaten the university as a space of open inquiry and debate, and are intended to intimidate free thinking and stifle critical dialogue. In fact, of course, no serious academic ever objects to anything, to investigations of anything in the past, including Bill Ayers. I know of no academic who would sign such a statement as the one that Jesse described. What the website actually says is this: the attacks on and the character assassination of Ayers threatened the university as a space of open inquiry and debate, and threatened schools as places of compassion, imagination, curiosity, and free thought. Those personal attacks and character assassination, serve as warnings that anyone who voices perspectives and advances questions that challenge orthodoxy and political power may become a target, and this then casts a chill over free speech and inquiry and the spirit of democracy. That is a very different matter, and it is true. I would like to ask Jesse whether he feels no guilt over sabotaging a carefully constructed statement that warns citizens against the harm that personal attacks and character assassinations bring to our communities and to the sort of inquiry that strengthens our democracy. I would ask Jesse why it seems to delight him to plant explosive distortions that may appear as victories for his side, but actually bring harm to our institutions and misrepresent and dishonor innocent individuals like Professor Hutchinson. I imagine that Jesse may not be immediately persuaded by my assertion that the kind of thoughtless, incurious piece he wrote constitutes an act of sabotage against our society. I think he and many others have grown up in a world that doesn't prepare a young person to get what I'm talking about. I don't claim to be smarter than Jesse, but I do think I was probably luckier in that I grew up in an America that was much more thoughtful about such matters. I'd like to tell Jesse about the influences that have caused me to see this kind of argument as misguided and harmful. I spent most of my formative years in the West, Idaho, Nevada, and Washington State. In very small town Washington State, I had a good friend, an old guy named Harold Otto. Harold was in his 80s when I was in my early 20s. He gave me great advice about bear hunting, and after I shot a bear, he taught me how to render its lard, from which my wife made the best pie crusts ever. Harold used to tell me what the area was like long before they dammed the Columbia. The story I most loved was a story he told of when he was just a kid, maybe 10 years old. It must have been about 1900. He said that a stranger rode into their little town on a horse with full saddlebags, then went up the Columbia a few miles and bought a farm with cash. It happened that there was a wanted poster in the post office. Harold and the other kids in town thought the description sounded a lot like the stranger. That night, Harold breathlessly told his dad that he thought maybe the stranger was the bank robber that the law was looking for. My dad looked me hard in the eyes, he told me, and he said, "I don't ever want to hear another word like that from you about anybody. There's not a one of us who doesn't have a past. Maybe that man robbed a bank, and maybe he didn't. But now he's our neighbor. If he's a good neighbor, he'll help us make a better community. If he turns out to be a bad man, here, he'll have to answer to us here for any wrongs he does."